Okay, our next talk about the identity governance and data protection with midPoint, and I'm turning to Radovan and Katarina. Please welcome.
Thank you. So, welcome. Today we would like to talk about midPoint, which is identity management and governance product.
My name is Katarina Alokova.
And my name is Radovan Semanci, and we are part of the midPoint core development team. So, it is quite difficult to explain identity management, governance, and data protection in 30 minutes. So, we have figured out that the best way how to do it is to show examples and demos. So maybe that would be the fastest way to explain the things. So we have prepared an example of a university environment, academic environment, which is quite magical, obviously, but also very traditional environment. So it has traditional problems. Like there is HR system, and data from HR system needs to be synchronized to a directory, but there is no direct path. There are applications that are based on the database, need local database records and so on. There are legacy systems that we would not like to see anymore, but well, it's difficult to remove them. So it's typical environment in universities, enterprises, and actually almost any bigger organizations. So the usual solution to this is to put identity management system there. So identity management system can take the data from HR systems, student records, employee records, all the workers and then volunteers and so on, and then synchronize the data to all the systems that the data are needed there. And that's exactly what we want to show you in the first demonstration. For simplicity, we have chosen just two systems. One HR system, then midPoint, and then LLAB as a target system. So let's see.
So let's have this one. This can be our environment of our university. You can see that we have two resources here. One of them is HR system, representing our source system. We will hold the data from the system, transfer the data, and then we will push the data, approach the data to the target system, which is represented in OpenLDAP. If you look into the details of the HR system, you can see that the first simulation for this demo, we use the CSV connector, and if you look into the data in our HR system, you can see that we have some basic information about users, such as their login name, first name, last name, and we have also information about membership, so to which organizational unit the users belong to, and also we have the information if someone manages some organizational unit or is a leader of some team. So let's go back to the midPoint. And here we can see the account from the HR system in midPoint, as you can see in more structured way. So let's start with importing this account and all the organizational unit to midPoint. We can do it simply by creating a new task. Now we can see that our import is running, and here we can see the progress, so how many accounts have been processed, and also if there were some errors or anything else. If you look here, we can see that our organizational structure is growing, and we can also see that the users are created still new. Here we can see our structure, which we pull from the HR system, and we can see the members of each organizational unit, and also we can see the manager of every organizational unit. We can see that each organizational unit is here we can also see that there are some British teams which are also represented by organizational structure, and we can also see that also team leaders are represented as managers. If you look into the profile of some users, created according to data from Azure system. So we can see that Albert Dumbledore is a part of the professor organizational unit and is also manager of auxiliary and manager of the professor's organizational unit. On the tab projections, you can see that Albert Dumbledore has two accounts. First account is Azure account, which is the sort of account in the Azure, so in the CSV file, and the OpenLDAP account, which is the account which was created during this import in the OpenLDAP. We can also see that as the Albert Dumbledore is a member of the professors and auxiliary organizational unit, he was also added to the groups in the OpenLDAP.
So, what we have done here is that we have all the data from the HR synchronized through the midpoint to the LDAP directory. It was actually quite easy to do, wasn't it, right? It was very easy, and there are a few things that you haven't seen so far. One of the things that you haven't seen is what is not there, and what is not there is the programming. This is completely declarative way how to synchronize the data, except for maybe one-liner scripts to transform something like a first name and last name to a full name. Things like that, construct VM and so on. So that's the only programming here. Everything else is declarative. So that also means that adding new target systems like this or this is quite easy. It has connectors to connect to these systems that make protocol adaptation, and then configuration that sets up the way how the attributes here are created or managed or synchronized with the other systems and so on. So this is identity management. And when you think about it, well, if you have something like a very smart Python script, it can actually do almost the same thing like here. Maybe not that well as midpoint, but it can. But what you cannot do with a simple script is to actually do the management stuff, to manage the identities. And that's what's called identity governance, and we will see that next.
So, okay, the first thing we need to know before we start with the identity governance is role. Role in a midpoint is basically the implementation of role-based access control. So you can specify in a role which privileges and accesses and groups the users will get after assigning this role to him. So let's look on some role, for example, transfiguration feature. The definition of this role-based access control is made by midpoint, and here we can see that assigning the role transfiguration feature to some users, the user will get the account in the OpenLDAP. And if we look into the more details of this configuration, we can see that the users will also be a member of transfiguration feature group.
So now what we are going to do, we are going to hire one new professor, which is Gilbert Lockhart, everybody's favorite. So what you need to do to hire a new professor is obviously to have him in HR system, but the complete organizational structure is not defined completely by the HR system. So Gilbert Lockhart will ask for a professor role, and the policy is the configured policy in midpoint is that there needs to be two approvers to grant the professor role. First, it needs to be approved by a manager, which is Dumbledore in this case, and then it also needs to be approved by the Minister of Magic. So let's see the process.
So, okay, now I'm going to as the Dr. Lockhart, and I'm going to ask for a role defense against dark art feature and dual classroom access. Here I can just review my request, and so I can see that something is starting, and after looking into it, I can see that the approval process started, and I'm waiting for approving both roles. So I can see that there are two stages of approvals, or two models of approvals, and here if I look into the process details, I can see that, as Bradley mentioned, there are two approvers. One of them is my manager, so Albert Dumbledore, and the second one is the Minister of Magic, which is my structure. If I look into my profile now, I can really see that the roles are not assigned yet, but it's not assigned yet. So let's wait for Albert Dumbledore to take this. looking into it, I can see who asked for what. And also I can see that also there are two stages, and I can also look into details that I'm the first approver and there is also second approver, so the responsibility is not mine, but for the dispatch to decide if it's safe to draw. So as the algorithm, let's approve both requests, and now we can log in as a kernel dispatch. And we can also see that now he has two assignments to approvals to decide. We can see also the same, and we can, in addition, we can see the first approval, because so who was the first approval, what was his decision, and also comments or anything else. So let's approve the request. And let's now look on the profile of the card. And here you can see that there are 4 assignments, that 2 assignments were added, and also if you look here into the details of the another account, you can see that the other card was added to these 2 groups, so the Tanzania is that card and the other access groups. Okay, so this was the, let's say, first scenario related to identity governance, and of course this is not everything. So now let's pretend that I'm wrapping up one, and I want to be a member of Gryffindor Quidditch team. As I'm a member of Slytherin Quidditch team, it's quite really close to be a member of the Gryffindor's Quidditch team, as they are 2 competing teams. So yes, I switched the password. Thank you. So now I interact with Alfred, thank you. And I'm going to request the Gryffindor Quidditch team, and I can see that there is some conflict. This scenario wants to show the segregation of duties, so there are some restrictions on the roles which cannot be assigned on the same time. For example, because these 2 roles can do too much privileges to the users, or as in this case, you cannot be a member of 2 competing teams. So we can resolve the conflict with our business.
So, in the meantime, poor Professor Lockhart had an accident. He lost all of his memory. But due to some legislation in the magical world, he cannot really remove him from the HR system because he is on long-term sick leave, so he needs to remain there. But on the other hand, we do not want some kind of lunatic to have teaching privileges, especially for dark arts. So now we are going to remove the privileges for dark arts teacher from Gilbert Lockhart.
Okay, so let's do it. Easier than a request for. So now we can see that the other Lockhart has no more assignments.
Yeah, but now there is some feeling that we have forgotten something, haven't we? So it is quite easy to request the role, get through approvals and so on, but it is quite difficult to remember what to remove at the end. So there is a special process to check that everything that should be removed was actually really removed, and that process is called recertification or access verification. How the process works is that it asks all the manager periodically, typically once per year, whether these particular users still need to have these particular privileges. So let's see.
So here we can see the campaign definition we use for success certification. So let's create a campaign and let's start this campaign. After looking into the details of the campaign, we can see that there are many users for different users of different can see that there are 22 items for all the temporal sites. So and let's see for the filter or what card. And we can see that there is this dwelling classroom access assignment, so just remote. After download make decision, we now need an administrator who will stop the campaign and start remediation process. Remediation process is the process which will apply and execute all the decisions. So during this remediation process, you should see that this assignment for dwelling classroom was unassigned from the worker. You can see that some remediation has started, and after looking into the details, we can see that there was one item processed, and we can see that it was revoking some regulation. So after looking into the builder or worker profile, we can see that we can now just do assignment. So this assignment to the classroom was also removed, and here we can also see that it was also removed from the groups from the
So, that was quite a light preview what identity governance really is. So, what actually identity governance is something like functionality based on top of identity management that is quite closer to the business. So, one could say that identity governance is putting management back to identity management. So, that's what identity governance is. What you have seen in the demo so far is quite a few functionality of what midPoint can do or what identity governance is. And there is much more that just cannot fit into this 30 minutes time slot. So for anyone interested, we would like to refer you to midPoint documentation and so on. But there is still one very exciting functionality that we would like to show you. And that's data protection functionality. So, what data protection actually is? Simply speaking, data protection is the proper management of the data. By proper, I mean proper both from the point of view of the university or employer, and proper from the point of view of students and consumers. And this means things like the controller should have a reason to process personal data. If there is no reason, then the personal data needs to be removed. That's one of the few principles of data protection. Data protection is not just the right thing to do, it's also a law. It may be a little bit scary. GDPR law is a European Union regulation that comes into force this May, so there is not much time left. But, again, this is quite a complex topic. So, to let you better understand what it really is, we have one more demonstration prepared for you.
Okay, so, let's pretend I'm weak and I have a problem with my memory and I don't want to forget, for example, my telephone number. So I will start here in midPoint. So every time someone asks me for my number, I can look into my profile and look my number. I can see that here is the number. And before I start with the email, I will start the synchronization class. Help me with the automation process. So now we can see that there are assignments of the roles, and we can see the other tab of the data protection. This tab tells us that if we have this at least one assignment, we have the legal basis to keep information about users in midPoint. After we delete all this assignment, we have no legal basis to keep, for example, this telephone number anymore in our midPoint. So first, if you remember the story of the this week was professor, but not forever, but for a short time. So you came from the professor organizational unit. And you can see that this assignment to the professor organizational unit was auxiliary assignment to the auxiliary organizational unit. So still we have the legal basis to keep the information about the grid in our system. So we can see the Delta number is still here. Now we can try to remove the from the auxiliary organizational unit. So we lost all privileges, and after looking into the detail, we can see that there is really no legal basis to keep information. And here we can see that we don't have enough number anymore. And we can also see that there runs some process which remove the telephone number, and in addition, we also make activation of the user because we don't have any legal basis, but we need to keep information about the user in our system. So he was disabled and he has no access anymore. As we can also see here that his account was removed also from.
So that was the data protection functionality, very slight demonstration. But to be completely honest, the data protection functionality is still quite experimental in midPoint. Whether it will get into the next release or the following release, we are not entirely sure. It is all governed by midPoint subscribers that are setting priorities for midPoint development. But we thought that it's very interesting demonstration for you. So, what you have seen here is like a three-part of a single product of midPoint. One is identity management in a classical way, then identity governance, and then also data protection functionality. So, as you can see, midPoint is really the only identity governance, open source identity governance system available. So it's perhaps not too bold to say it is also the best one. and with that, I would like to thank you for your attention. And I believe we have still some room for questions.
Can you please switch on the lights?
So, any questions? Please.
The question is midPoint a product developed solely by one company behind it, or do you have a community of external contributors also?
Yeah.
Okay, so the question is if midPoint is developed only by one company, or is there any other community behind it?
Most of the development is done by Evolve, which is one company. But there are external contributors, but to be completely honest, not in the product core. There are bug fixes coming in, some extensions, and some examples. There is actually community, maybe even over 100 people, maybe even more. But the vast majority of development is done by Evolve. More questions?
How can I plug my piece of functionality to use your identity management? Do you offer API?
If midPoint offers API. Yes.
So there are many ways how to plug in functionality, from the very simplest, like this one line of scripts to compose a distinguished name or full name, to the very complex hooks inside midPoint. And in the extreme case, midPoint is open source, it is Apache license, so you can just check out the code and modify what you like. But yes, there is an API. Actually, two API. There is small-salt API and REST API with equivalent functionality. Any more?
Quick question. In your demonstration, you used user account objects. What about computer account objects? Because, for example, in a directory or some other event, we can base some rules for some servers or stuff like that.
If there is possibility to use also another object classes in LDAP as user account.
So the short answer is yes, of course. First of all, we have a special type of object in midPoint. It's called a service. There is a catch-all for service. catch all for servers, network devices, and so on. But if you look 2 years back in the FOSDEM presentation, 2 years pre-this, Katarina actually did a presentation for integration of midPoint with virtual machine management. So it was a very good hands-on presentation of how to do it.
Also here you can see that the organizational unit which was created is also projection and it's what they call that group of names. There is possibility to have two sources and merge identities from sources.
Yes, of course. Any number of sources. Actually, midPoint does not. There is no fundamental difference between source and target and midPoint. Just the direction of the data node. So we can have any number of sources, and there is a way how to again declaratively define whether two accounts are considered to be matching. So they represent the same identity. It is quite easy to do actually. But it's something that almost all identity management systems does. So it's not something that is special to anybody.
So I guess you can customize the approval workflow you showed before.
Yes.
You can have complex setups. So technically, how would you do it? Is it like with DSL or in code? Or?
If there is a possibility to customize the workflow process and how.
So yes, of course. Actually, there are several ways to do it. First of all, midPoint workflows and approvals as well are based on the activity VPN engine. So that's actually what the engine that does the approvals. So there is a way how to modify the workflow processes there. But we have found even easier way. So for now, midPoint, recent versions of midPoint has something that is called policy-based configuration of approvals. So we can actually specify approval policy for each individual role. So each role can have a different process and it is completely declarative.
And maybe like a follow-up, did you think about creating like kind of score for common workflows?
If we thought about creating some sort for
Actually, for approval workflow, it's probably not true because the workflow is just one. It is give someone something to approve, and the something is usually assignment of a role or relation lead and so on. So for the workflow itself, it's not really needed because there is just one repeated over and over again. What is probably interesting is the policy settings for different things like approval by manager, approval by role owner, approval by security officer. We have examples for that. Not really a story because again there are not that many options.
You were talking about data protection, but where and how do you define which data is sensitive? And for instance, PII data, PHI data, and that kind of thing, because you were talking about GDPR, we are in the middle of that.
So where and how we define which data are sensitive?
So, for now, again, the data protection functionality is still experimental, so it's very simple. So for now, what we can define is which data to remove when the user gets to the archive state, and we do not have any rights to process this information. And we define that we have a right to process the information by especially marking the roles that give us that right. So that's the current state of the functionality. But it can be extended, of course. And we are actually looking forward to customers that are actually implementing GDPR, and practical experience and practical requirements to let us guide the functionality ahead.
Last question.
Yeah.
How do you deal with secrets in your solution? Because you have many targets and it's not the same secrets anyway.
How do we deal with secrets because of different targets?
Well, there are no secrets for identity management. Identity management knows everything. Okay. Because that's the hub in the wheel. Everything goes through identity management. But of course, we are trying to protect at least the passwords and several things. You cannot actually encrypt everything because in this way, we probably cannot use that for correlation. Database will not work if you work on encrypted values. So we can encrypt password, for example, because we do correlate these. So we have a special application for encryption for passwords. For the rest, we are just keeping in midpoint everything in clear.
Yeah.
So you can rely on database level
Just
encryption.
tags sensitive information for the password.
There may be, and that's the reason identity management tool is always a sensitive thing.
Okay.
But you can use database level encryption there, and of course you can use network level encryption there. But the identity management system itself will see the data.
Okay.
It has to process them, so it needs to see them. And I guess that's it.
Yes.
So thank you again.